Welcome to 5 Points of Articulation Evolution, where we chronicle the history of one character in action figure form. February is the month of love. So, as a Valentine's Day present from me to you, today we're going to spotlight a female character that I adore, Ororo Munroe STORM. Before we begin, I'm Jason, and if you want to give me a Valentine, like, share, subscribe, and do all the YouTube rigmarole. First things first, I want to set a few parameters. We will not be looking at any figures larger than 7-inch scale. We're also not going to be looking at any figures with cloth goods clothes, or any figures meant for little kids. Obviously, we're not going to look at every Storm action figure ever made, though pretty darn close to it. Even so, we will cover just enough of the highlights so that you can witness action figure evolution. Ororo's action figure journey began in 1991 with the Uncanny X-Men Series 1 by Toy Biz. The figure was called Power Glow Storm and featured a light-up lightning bolt, which no longer works, and included a lightning bolt accessory, which has sadly been lost to the sands of time. She stands at just under 5 inches and has 8 points of articulation. They include swivel shoulders, single-jointed elbow, V-style swivel hips, and single-jointed knee. We often comment on how unposable a female figure's head is because of their hair, but here, Toy Biz didn't even try. And I mean that in general. Even by 1991 standards, this was pretty rough. For some perspective, Toy Biz released both these figures in the same year. And honestly, they must have been pretty proud of it because they used this mold for years. For example, they reissued this figure in silver, which I don't have, and then they released it again in white. The yellow trim and the X-Men logos on her shoulders definitely evokes what kids were seeing on the animated series at that time. They also added this vinyl cape. Flipping her around and you can see the switch for the Power Glow feature. Unfortunately, this one doesn't work either. Toy Biz wouldn't give us a new Storm sculpt until 1997 with Robot Fighters. This figure recreates her late 90s costume following the events of the Onslaught story arc, not counting the figure stand, and she clocks in at 5 3/4 inches and has 5 points of articulation. Like before, she has V-style swivel hips, but this time she was upgraded to swivel hinge shoulders. She does technically have neck articulation, but it's functionally useless because of her luxurious locks. And I'm not kidding, this hair is pretty epic. The hair is so heavy, in fact, that I had to use a figure stand. If you're curious, Toy Biz made these for Generation X. Toy Biz actually released 2 versions of this figure, one with this hair, and this variant with hair more closely in style with what she had in the comics. As if to apologize for years of mediocrity, Toy Biz gave us not 1, but 3 all-new sculpted figures. This one was from a series called Water Wars. Already we can see a huge leap forward. This one stands at 5 1/4 inches, but to be fair, she does have a bit of a wide stance. She also has 6 points of articulation. Realizing it would have been pointless, they abandoned the neck articulation, but they kept the swivel hinge shoulder. Like CDs replacing records, the vinyl was out, and in was an all-new plastic cape, which looks great like this, but doesn't move with her articulation. That said, she still has her swivel hips, but they also gave her single knee. Rounding out the trio of 1997 releases is Savageland Storm. The shortest of the 3, she doesn't even come to 5 inches, and has 6 points of articulation. Working our way from the bottom to the top, and she has swivel hips, swivel hinge shoulders, and a functional neck joint thanks to this epic ponytail keeping her hair away from her shoulders. It also has its own articulation. You'll notice that unlike the Robot Fighters version, she has no problem standing, and that's despite the hair. This is a good thing because they didn't give her any peg holes in her feet, but they literally sculpted a support wedge into the back of her foot. This just looks painful. For a character who got her start being worshipped as a goddess, I always liked this look. The top and the necklace, for example, look very regal. But what I love the most about this figure is its accessory. Colossus as a Triceratops. I'm not going to go too much into it here because I actually have a whole Colossus video coming out, but suffice it to say, this is one of the coolest things that Toy Biz made that year. And speaking of toys released that year, here are all 3 Storms of 1997. It was a wonderful moment in time for a wonderful character. That said, 1998 brought us something very special, the giant-sized X-Men #1 box set, and with it, this awesome version of Storm. She stands at 5 1/4 inches, and as had become customary, she doesn't have any head articulation, but in addition to the usual ball-jointed shoulders and V-style hips, she also had elbow articulation for the first time since 1991, knee articulation, and for the first time ever, ankle hinge. Another big improvement was the cloth cape. This allowed her to actually use her arm articulation. It's also significant for being the very first time that this version of Storm had been realized in action figure form. In addition to Storm, the set included Sunfire, Thunderbird, an incredible Nightcrawler, Banshee, who we're still waiting for Hasbro to give us. Oh, and Hasbro, when you do, please give him a screaming head. And lastly, it included this Colossus, which again we'll be talking about another time. Still, I always wished that it came with a Wolverine. That's better. Not only was this my favorite Storm figure when I was a kid, but it's significant for one other reason. This is the final 5-inch scale Storm figure that Toy Biz ever made. While all of them are special or significant one way or another, I think it's safe to say they saved the best Storm for last. As the world moved into both a new decade and a new century, Toy Biz moved to 6-inch scale figures, and something else happened that changed both X-Men and superhero movies forever. The live-action X-Men movie. With it came this Storm figure based on Halle Berry. She stands at just 5¼ inches and has some very curious design choices. From the top, and for 2000, this face sculpt isn't bad, especially when you compare it to this. The cape is a soft plastic, but it doesn't connect to her wrist, so it really isn't a problem. What is a problem is this really weird pre-pose stance. Like, seriously, who thought that this PP dance was a good idea? She does have leg articulation, but with the V-style hips and no ankle articulation, just standing her always comes back to this. And on the subject of the pre-pose stance, the left arm is permanently frozen like this. The shoulder is swivel hinge, so you could make her raise her hand to ask Professor Xavier a question, and then the other shoulder is actually a swivel. That's to accommodate her action feature. Nice to meet ya! It ports into the base like so, and does this. In her defense, there is supposed to be flashing lights and thunder. The popularity of the movie led to a whole new animated series, X-Men Evolution. Triple extreme action. Taking a look at the back, and other figures in the wave included Ninja Wolverine, Spike, and the Blob. While Storm herself is 6 inches on the dot, thanks to this cape, she hovers at around 6¾ It's cast in a hard plastic and has a bendy wire at the bottom. This is a good thing, as I'm pretty sure that these spindly little cartoon-style legs are not going to stand on their own. Interestingly enough, this is the very first Storm figure to have pupils, so naturally she's cross-eyed. Otherwise, it's just a general design for Storm. I actually like this. There's some blue highlights throughout that really bring out the detail. We can see more of that on the cape, but once we turn her around, we get to something I don't like. The giant hole in her head! Seriously, what was it with Toy Biz? This particular hole is for the plunger so that you can do her squirting effect. And it broke. And frankly, this looks horrifying. Also, this base is ridiculous. It comes with two of these little missile things you coil up. The way it works is you kind of clip her into it like so, and then you pull this lever down. I don't care, I'm not doing it again. Besides, we have something very important to talk about. 2002 and the dawn of Marvel Legends. In 2004, we got this Storm in Series 8. To the top of her hair, she stands at just over 6¾ inches, and to the best of my counting ability, has 25 points of articulation. This includes a ball-jointed neck, they even made her hair windswept so it wouldn't get in the way, swivel hinge shoulders, an extra bit to make her arm go up and down, bicep swivel, double-jointed elbows, forearm swivel, an ab crunch that arches back this far and hunches over this far, swivel waist, swivel hinge hips, thigh cut, double jointed knees, boot cut, and ankle hinge. For posability, I'll give you this Storm 1 whole point. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong kind of video. Why, just a few months ago, some of us, myself included, were over the moon that Hasbro finally gave us bicep swivel and double-jointed elbows in Lady Legend. But Toy Biz had this on lock almost 20 years ago. I will say that the figure is kind of let down by how overly wrinkled it is. Kind of looks like she's wearing one of those sauna suits. Also, the cape is a matter of personal taste. Unlike the Water Wars one, it's nice and soft, so there's no problem with articulation. When we get to the Hasbro years, we'll do a comparison. Either way, this is one of Toy Biz's best Marvel Legends, and I think it still stands up. And speaking of standing up, it came with a really cool cloud base. It even has hook holes so you can hang it. Doing so looks something like that, or if you prefer, there are also pegs up top. Toy Biz must have liked this figure too, because they reissued it 2 years later as part of their X-Men Classic series. This time they put her in the white costume. Mine's missing some red, unfortunately. Thanks to the animated series, this is my preferred look, but I do have to admit Toy Biz went a bit crazy with the airbrushing. And in general, mine's just sort of seen better days. Unlike the Legends version, this one came with a more basic flight stand. It does have a wall mount though. It plugs into this hole that they added to her back. It's been almost 15 years and I would still take this over the clippy, ugly flight stands that they released today. This figure is also special because it represents the final Storm figure that Toy Biz ever made. These 3 figures perfectly encapsulate Toy Biz's journey. Their rocky beginnings trying to find their footing, the action figure boom of the 90s when they finally hit their stride, and of course, the standard bearer that they became. Toy Biz was a special company that showed that great things truly can come from small beginnings. And speaking of small, the next time we'd see Storm would be in the 3¾ inch Marvel Universe series by Hasbro. There were a few different versions of this figure, but this one has cell shading and is based on her look from giant-sized X-Men 1. Thanks to her hair, she comes to just under 4 inches and has a surprising amount of articulation for this scale. In addition to a ball-jointed head, she has swivel hinge shoulders, single-jointed elbow, and swivel wrists, a diaphragm joint, waist swivel, ball-jointed hips, double-jointed knees, and ankles that swivel and hinge. Since she has a diaphragm joint, I think she could have done without the waist swivel. beautiful, but it is far and away more advanced than the first figure of her ever made. Unfortunately, all of her costume detail has been painted on. Additionally, Hasbro opted for a hard plastic cape, which led to the original owner's decision to rip it off at the wrist. While I do think that the Toybiz one is objectively better, I am pretty surprised at just how much posability they were able to pack into this tiny figure. Oddly enough, the next time we'd see Storm on toy store shelves would be the following year, in the same costume, and be the largest scaled all-plastic Storm figure ever made. This figure was made by Diamond and is part of the Marvel Select line that is exclusive to comic book and hobby shops. Very nice artwork on the side, beautifully traced by Greg Land, drawn by Greg Land, and a product shot on the back. Variant called the TVA. This Storm is a 1/10 scale figure and stands at just under 7.5 inches. Because of contractual limitations, this Storm isn't quite as posable as some of her previous counterparts. She does have head articulation, swivel hinge shoulders rendered completely useless by the cape, single jointed elbows, swivel in the wrist, swivel hinge hips, double jointed knees again hindered by the cape, and ankles that swivel and hinge. And seriously, just look at how high those heels are. In general, I like this face sculpt, and the overall figure looks very nice. I appreciate the gold trim as opposed to the yellow, and that the ring holding her costume together is sculpted on instead of painted. Additionally, they made a very smart choice in not connecting the hands to the cape, and the cape itself is sculpted very nicely, but I can't stress enough just how hard it is. Between the hair and the cape, I am astonished that she's able to stand on her own. Apparently, Marvel Select was pretty astonished too, because she comes with her own figure stand. She also comes with a pretty cool diorama piece recreating a cross-section of the Danger Room. All the Marvel Select X-Men came with these, and if you put them together, you can make one large scene. And speaking of putting things together, here are all three of our 70s era Storms so far. By 2014, Hasbro finally got their Marvel Legends act together, giving us the most valuable, highly sought-after Storm action figure ever made. The Toys R Us exclusive Jubilee Wave Marvel Now Storm. Loose, this figure goes for up to $100, and in box it goes up to $400. That's why I bought a bootleg. While it might not bear close scrutiny, at a glance, this figure is virtually indistinguishable from the original. This figure features parts that Hasbro still uses to this day and is one of the most important Marvel Legends that they ever made. I'm actually working on a whole episode about this figure, so I'm not going to talk any more about it here, but definitely keep your eyes peeled for that. The next time we'd see Storm is the 2018 Apocalypse Wave. This figure is inspired by Storm's punk phase in the 80s and is one of my favorite looks. To the top of her head she stands at 6.25 inches, but to the top of her mohawk she stands at 6 3/4. And on the subject of mohawks, it's not quite as fabulous as the Marvel Now, but it is still pretty bad. And by bad, I mean 80s slang for good. In terms of articulation, her head's on a ball joint and a disc hinge. She has swivel hinge shoulders, single jointed swivel elbows, and swivel hinge wrists. All the torso articulation is in the diaphragm. She can arch back that far and hunch over that far. Moving on down, and she has ball jointed hips, thigh cut, double jointed knees, and Marvel Legends ankles that hinge, swivel, and pivot. In 2019, they gave us this Jim Lee era version in the X-Men Retro Wave. It's pretty much the exact same size and has the same articulation as the Mohawk version, so I'm not going to go into that here. Putting it side by side the Toybiz version, however, and the differences become instantly apparent. The proportions, for example, are much better on the Hasbro version. If I could just draw your attention to the Toybiz version's very tiny head, and whereas the Toybiz one is white with blue shading, this one was cast in a white marbleized plastic to give it a pearlescent sheen. It also doesn't look baggy. The biggest difference, however, are the capes. The Toybiz one, of course, has a soft rubber sculpted cape, and the Hasbro figure has a fabric one. The benefit of the cloth cape is that it hangs more naturally in a static pose, whereas the rubber one looks like it's always caught in a wind tunnel. The downside of the cloth cape is that it's a cheap material. It's a shame, too, when you consider just how nice this Toybiz one was. This is actually two separate layers of fabric with trim, and this feels like it belongs on a birthday party tablecloth. So then, moment of truth, which one do I prefer? I'm actually going to make you wait a little bit longer for that one. Lining them up, and here are all of our white costume Storms. If this is an action figure evolution, I don't know what is. In Toybiz tradition, Hasbro reissued the figure the following year in black. This is actually one of the few figures I didn't have in my collection that I bought special for this video, and I'm not gonna lie, I kinda like it better. For one thing, I appreciate the metallic gold as compared to the more cartoony yellow, and for another, the black costume really helps the white hair to stand out. This is my current roster of Jim Lee era X-Men. Unfortunately, I lost Jubilee's glasses to the Carpet Goblins. Also, I do have the retro card Gambit and Rogue, I just haven't cracked into them yet. I can't deny that the white costume feels classic, but I don't know, this looks pretty cool too. I will say that the yellow does tie better to other characters, and looking at the whole group, the white costume really pops. Ultimately, I guess it boils down to personal preference. Which one do you prefer? Sound off in the comments below. Our final 6-inch scale Storm is the Thunderbird 2-pack. This set was part of the X-Men Anniversary Collection, and featured some very nice artwork. The Thunderstrike wasn't much to write home about, about. The proportions were odd. The boot fringe doesn't want to stay up. He has accessory holding hands but no accessories. It's hard to tell on camera, but the red of his upper torso doesn't match the red of his lower torso, and his head sits a bit high. Storm, on the other hand, is darn near perfect. She comes pre-packed with these really cool lightning effect hands. Unlimited power! Additionally, her sculpted cape is wild and billowy. But wait! There's more! She also comes with an alternate head and cape for a more powered-down static look. And the great cape debate between sculpted and cloth, this is absolutely the way to go if you can. I completely understand that this technique would not work for every character, but where it does work, it kicks the figure up to a whole new level. Obviously, some bicep swivel or double-jointed elbows would have been cool, but my only real criticisms, aside from the paint slop, is that I kinda wish that this was more gold than yellow. At the very least, I think the ring should have been gold, similar to how the Toybiz one had yellow trim and a gold hoop. I also think it was a missed opportunity not to make the boot tops a separate piece so you could hide the thigh cut, but overall, this might just be the best Storm action figure ever made. Lining them up, and here are all of our Hasbro-era Marvel Legends Storm figures so far. This figure might be the best, but it's certainly not the last. For that, we return to the 3 3/4 inch scale and the Kenner-style Tribute Collection. Really wonderful artwork on the card. In fact, you can even cut it out. I wonder if anybody actually does that. Getting her out of the blister, and this is about as basic as you can get. Similar to the Marvel Universe version, all the costume details have been painted, but unlike the Marvel Universe one, which was superposable, this one has just 7 points of articulation. That includes a neck joint which doesn't really move because of the hair, shoulder swivel and forearm swivel, and T-style swivel hips. One good thing about this figure I will say is that they used a gold trim instead of yellow, but at $10 it is such a downgrade from the previous one that it is laughable. That said, I actually have a theory about this line that they're not meant to be played with. I really think that these are meant to be left in their card and treated as a collectible art piece. You've got the big beautiful picture, a mediocre figure that more suggests the idea of an action figure, and a logo that fills you with nostalgia despite the fact that it never had anything to do with Marvel. In a way, they're almost like Hasbro's equivalent of a Funko Pop. And don't worry, you know that we're gonna get to this guy eventually. Lining them up, and here we have all of our 70s era Storms. Again, they did release a few different versions of this one, and Toybiz definitely got their money's worth out of this one. But just in terms of sculpts, this is the version of Storm that has been best represented in action figure form. Here are the highlights of what I believe to be the most significant Storms. If you just looked at the first figure and the last figure, you might be tempted to think that action figures really hadn't come all that far. But just like real evolution, the journey tells the story. I hope you've enjoyed this look at Storm's action figure evolution. A lot of work went into this, but also a lot of love. If you enjoyed it, please do me a favor and give it a like. Also, check out this video on the evolution of Spider-Man. I'll be back again real soon, but until then, play nice and have fun.